Hi, my name is Abigail Bradshaw, and I would like to present to you our work showing that sensorimotor learning in speech is modulated by interaction with another voice. When we experimentally modify the sound of a speaker's voice in real time, for example to make them sound like they have a slight accent, speakers are found to unconsciously compensate for these changes by changing the way they produce speech sounds, and this is known as speech motor adaptation. We also know in a somewhat separate literature that when we interact with other speakers, our voices tend to become more similar to one another, and this is known as vocal convergence. The key question for this project concerns how might adaptation and vocal convergence interact with one another, and further, do they rely on a shared sensorimotor learning mechanism? To test this, we made real-time changes to the sound of a speaker's voice while they produce sentences in synchrony with another voice, known as the accompanist. The change to the participant's own voice can be visualized as pulling their voice in a southeast direction, thus requiring compensatory changes in a northwest direction, and that's shown by the purple arrows on these plots. Crucially, at the same time, the acoustics of the accompanist voice they synchronized with were also manipulated between groups, such that convergence to that voice would either pull the participant's voice in an opposite direction to adaptation, as shown by the green arrow for the incongruent group here, or pull them in the same direction as adaptation, as shown for the congruent group. Our main hypothesis of interest was that adaptation should be significantly smaller in the incongruent compared to the congruent group. So before participants heard their own voice altered, we first measured their convergence to the accompanist voice during synchronous speech. You can see that while most of the congruent group are moving their voice in the expected northwest direction, on the whole the incongruent group are not moving their voice in the expected southeast direction. Following this, we then introduced a change to the participant's own voice while they continued speaking in synchrony with the accompanist, and this plot shows the resulting changes in their speech productions. Here you can see that while both groups are on average moving their voice in the expected northwest direction, this looks to be of much greater magnitude and much more consistent across individuals in the congruent than the incongruent group. And indeed, the incongruent group was unique in having a small number of participants who moved their speech productions in the same direction as the alteration to their voice, and this is known as a following response. The results of our statistical analyses confirmed that while the congruent group showed significant convergence to the accompanist voice, the incongruent group did not. However, nevertheless, our main hypothesis was still supported that adaptation was significantly smaller in the incongruent compared to the congruent group. Overall, these findings suggest that we use the same speech targets for both the perception of other voices and the production of the self voice, suggesting an overlap between mechanisms of perception and action. Thank you for listening.